Section 15 of Essays of Schopenhauer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Essays of Schopenhauer by Arthur Schopenhauer, translated by Sarah Hay Dirks. Religion, a Dialogue, Part 3. Philalithes. I wish you would not continually say that. To free a man from error does not mean to take something from him, but to give him something. For knowledge that something is wrong is a truth. No error, however, is harmless. Every error will cause mischief sooner or later to the man who fosters it. Therefore, do not deceive anyone, but rather admit you are ignorant of what you do not know, and let each man form his own dogmas for himself. Perhaps they will not turn out so bad, especially as they will rub against each other and mutually rectify errors. At any rate, the various opinions will establish tolerance. Those men who possess both knowledge and capacity may take up the study of philosophy, or even themselves advance the history of philosophy. Demophiles. That would be a fine thing. A whole nation of naturalized metaphysicians, quarrelling with each other, and, eventualiter, striking each other. Philalithes. While a few blows here and there are the source of life, or at least a very slight evil compared with priestly government, prosecution of heretics, plundering of the laity, courts of inquisition, crusades, religious wars, massacres of St. Bartholomew, and the like, they have been the results of chartered popular metaphysics. Therefore I still hold that one cannot expect to get grapes from thistles, or good from lies and deception. Demophiles. How often must I repeat that religion is not a lie, but the truth itself, in a mythical, allegorical dress? But with respect to your plan of each man establishing his own religion, I had still something to say to you, that a particularism like this is totally and absolutely opposed to the nature of mankind, and therefore would abolish all social order. Man is an animal metaphysicum. In other words, he has surpassingly great metaphysical requirements. Accordingly, he conceives life above all in its metaphysical sense, and from that standpoint wishes to grasp everything. Accordingly, odd as it may sound with regard to the uncertainty of all dogmas, accord in the fundamental elements of metaphysics is the principal thing, insomuch as it is only among people who hold the same views on this question that a genuine and lasting fellowship is possible. As a result of this, nations resemble and differ from each other more in religion than in government or even language. Consequently, the fabric of society, the state, will only be perfectly firm when it has for a basis a system of metaphysics universally acknowledged. Such a system, naturally, can only be a popular metaphysical one, that is, a religion. It then becomes identified with the government, with all the general expressions of the national life, as well as with all sacred acts of private life. This was the case in ancient India among the Persians, Egyptians, Jews, also the Greeks and Romans, and it is still the same among the Brahmins, Buddhist, and Mohammedan nations. There are 3 doctrines of faith in China, it is true, and the one that has spread the most, namely Buddhism, is exactly the doctrine that is least protected by the state. Yet there is a saying in China that is universally appreciated and daily applied. The 3 doctrines are only one. In other words, they agree in the main thing. The emperor confesses all 3 at the same time and agrees with them all. Europe is the confederacy of Christian states. Christianity is the basis of each of its members and the common bond of all. Hence Turkey, although it is in Europe, is really not to be reckoned in it. Similarly, the European princes are such by the grace of God, and the Pope is the delegate of God. Accordingly, as his throne was the highest, He wished all other thrones to be looked upon only as held in fee from him. Similarly, archbishops and bishops, as such, had temporal authority, just as they have still in England a seat and voice in the upper house. Protestant rulers are, as such, heads of their churches. In England, a few years ago, this was a girl of 18. By the revolt from the Pope, the Reformation shattered the European structure, and in particular dissolved the true unity of Germany by abolishing its common faith. This unity, which had as a matter of fact come to grief, had accordingly to be replaced later by artificial and purely political bonds. So you see how essentially connected is unity of faith with common order and every state. It is everywhere the support of the laws and the constitution, that is to say, the foundation of the social structure, which would stand with difficulty if faith did not lend power to the authority of the government and the importance of the ruler. Philalithes. Oh yes, princes look upon God as a goblin, wherewith to frighten grown-up children to bed, when nothing else is of any avail. It is for this reason that they depend so much on God. All right. Meanwhile, I should like to advise every ruling lord to read through, on a certain day, every 6 months, the 15th chapter of the first book of Samuel, earnestly and attentively, so that he may always have in mind what it means to support the throne on the altar. Moreover, since burning at the stake, that ultima ratio theologorum is a thing of the past, this mode of government has lost its efficacy. For, as you know, religions are like glowworms. Before they can shine, it must be dark. A certain degree of general ignorance is the condition of every religion, and is the element in which alone it is able to exist. While as soon as astronomy, natural science, geology, history, knowledge of countries and nations have spread their light universally, and philosophy is finally allowed to speak, every faith which is based on miracle and revelation must perish, and then philosophy will take its place. In Europe, the day of knowledge and science dawned towards the end of the 15th century with the arrival of the modern Greek philosophers. Its sun rose higher in the 16th and 17th century, which were so productive and scattered the mists of the Middle Age. In the same proportions, both church and faith were obliged to gradually disappear, so that in the 18th century English and French philosophers became direct antagonists, until finally, under Frederick the Great, Kant came and took away from religious belief the support it had formerly received from philosophy, and emancipated the ancilla theologiae, in that he attacked the question with German thoroughness and perseverance, whereby it received a less frivolous, that is to say, a more earnest tone. As a result of this, we see, in the 19th century, Christianity very much weakened, almost stripped entirely of serious belief, nay, fighting for its own existence, while apprehensive princes try to raise it up by an artificial stimulant, as the doctor tries to revive a dying man by the aid of a drug. There is a passage from Condorcet's Des progrès de l'esprit humain, which seems to have been written as a warning to our epoch. Les zèles religieux des philosophes et des grands n'étaient qu'une dévotion politique, et toute religion qu'on se permet de défendre comme une croyance qu'il est utile de laisser au peuple ne peut plus espérer qu'une agonie plus ou moins prolongée. In the whole course of the events which I have pointed out, you may always observe that belief and knowledge bear the same relation to each other as the two scales of a balance. When the one rises, the other must fall. The balance is so sensitive that it indicates momentary influences. For example, in the beginning of this century, the predatory excursions of French robbers under their leader, Bonaparte, and the great efforts that were requisite to drive them out and to punish them, had led to a temporary neglect of science, and in consequence to a certain decrease in the general propagation of knowledge. The Church immediately began to raise her head again and faith to be revived, a revival partly of a poetical nature, in keeping with the spirit of the times. On the other hand, in the more than 30 years' peace that followed, leisure and prosperity promoted the building up of science and the spread of knowledge in an exceptional degree, so that the result was what I have said, the dissolution and threatened fall of religion. Perhaps the time, which has been so often predicted, is not far distant, when religion will depart from European humanity, like a nurse whose care the child has outgrown. It is now placed in the hands of a tutor for instruction. For without doubt, doctrines of belief, that are based only on authority, miracles and revelation, are only of use and suitable to the childhood of humanity. That a race which all physical and historical data confirm as having been in existence only about 100 times the life of a man 60 years old, is still in its first childhood, is a fact that everyone will admit. Demophiles. If instead of prophesying with undisguised pleasure the downfall of Christianity, you would only consider how infinitely indebted European humanity is to it, and to the religion which, after the lapse of some time, followed Christianity from its old home in the East, Europe received from it a drift which had hitherto been unknown to it. It learned the fundamental truth that life cannot be an end in itself, but that the true end of our existence lies beyond it. The Greeks and Romans had placed this end absolutely in life itself, so that in this sense they may most certainly be called blind heathens. Correspondingly, all their virtues consist in what is serviceable to the public, in what is useful, and Aristotle says quite naively, those virtues must necessarily be the greatest which are the most useful to others. Ανάγκη δε μέγιστας είναι αρετάς τας της άλλης χρησιμότατας. Rhetoric, Book 1, Chapter 9. This is why the ancients considered love for one's country the greatest virtue, although it is a very doubtful one, as it is made up of narrowness, prejudice, vanity, and an enlightened self-interest. Preceding the passage that has just been quoted, Aristotle enumerates all the virtues in order to explain them individually. They are justice, courage, moderation, magnificence, megaloprepia, magnanimity, liberality, gentleness, reasonableness, and wisdom. How different from the Christian virtues! Even Plato, without comparison the most transcendental philosopher of pre-Christian antiquity, knows no higher virtue than justice. He alone recommends it unconditionally and for its own sake, while all the other philosophers make a happy life, vita beata, the aim of all virtue, and it is acquired through the medium of moral behavior. Christianity released European humanity from its superficial and crude absorption in an ephemeral, uncertain, and hollow existence. Quellumque tueri iusit, et erectos ad sidera tolere vultus. Accordingly, Christianity does not only preach justice, but the love of mankind, compassion, charity, reconciliation, love of one's enemies, patience, humility, renunciation, faith, and hope. Indeed, it went even further. It taught that the world was of evil, and that we needed deliverance. Consequently, it preached contempt for the world, self-denial, chastity, the giving up of one's own will, that is to say, turning away from life and its phantom-like pleasures. It taught further the healing power of suffering, and that an instrument of torture is the symbol of Christianity. I willingly admit that this serious and only correct view of life had spread in other forms throughout Asia thousands of years previously, independently of Christianity as it is still. But this view of life was a new and tremendous revelation to European humanity. For it is well known that the population of Europe consists of Asiatic races who, driven out from their own country, wandered away, and by degrees hit upon Europe. On their long wanderings they lost the original religion of their homes, and with it the correct view of life. And this is why they formed in another climate religions for themselves, which were somewhat crude, especially the worship of Odin. the Druidic and the Greek religions, the metaphysical contents of which were small and shallow. Meanwhile, there developed among the Greeks a quite special, one might say an instinctive, sense of beauty, possessed by them alone of all the nations of the earth that have ever existed, a peculiar, fine, and correct sense of beauty, so that in the mouths of their poets and in the hands of their artists, their mythology took an exceptionally beautiful and delightful form. On the other hand, the earnest, true, and profound import of life was lost to the Greeks and Romans. They lived like big children until Christianity came and brought them back to the serious side of life. Philalithes. And to form an idea of the result, we need only compare antiquity with the Middle Age that followed, that is, the time of Pericles with the 14th century. It is difficult to believe that we have the same kind of beings before us. There, the finest development of humanity, excellent constitutional regulations, wise laws, cleverly distributed offices, rationally ordered freedom, all the arts, as well as poetry and philosophy at their best, the creation of works which after thousands of years have never been equalled, and are almost works of a higher order of beings, whom we can never approach. Life embellished by the noblest fellowship, as is portrayed in the banquet of Xenophon. And now look at this side, if you can. Look at the time when the Church had imprisoned the minds and violenced the bodies of men, whereby knights and priests could lay the whole weight of life on the common beast of burden, the third estate. There you have club law, feudalism, and fanaticism in close alliance, and in their train shocking uncertainty and darkness of mind, a corresponding intolerance, discord of faiths, religious wars, crusades, persecution of heretics and inquisitions as a form of fellowship, chivalry, an amalgam of savagery and foolishness, with its pedantic system of absurd affectations, its degrading superstitions, and apish veneration for women, the survival of which is gallantry, deservedly requited by the arrogance of women. It affords to all Asiatics continual material for laughter, in which the Greeks would have joined. In the Golden Middle Age, the matter went as far as the formal and methodical service of women, and enjoined deeds of heroism, cour d'amour, bombastic troubadour songs, and so forth, although it is to be observed that these last absurdities, which have an intellectual side, were principally at home in France, while among the material phlegmatic Germans the knights distinguished themselves more by drinking and robbing. Drinking and hoarding their castles with plunder were the occupations of their lives. And certainly there was no want of stupid love songs in the courts. What has changed the scene so? Migration and Christianity. Demophiles. It is a good thing you reminded me of it. Migration was the source of the evil, and Christianity the dam on which it broke. Christianity was the means of controlling and taming those raw, wild hordes who were washed in by the flood of migration. The savage man must first of all learn to kneel, to venerate, and to obey. It is only after that he can be civilized. This was done in Ireland by St. Patrick, in Germany by Winifred the Saxon, who was a genuine Boniface. It was migration of nations, this last movement of Asiatic races towards Europe, followed only by their fruitless attempts under Attila, Genghis Khan, and Timur, and as a comic afterpiece by the gypsies. It was migration of nations which swept away the humanity of the ancients. Christianity was the very principle which worked against this savagery, just as later, through the whole of the Middle Age, the Church and its hierarchy were extremely necessary to place a limit to the savagery and barbarism of those lords of violence, the princes and knights. It was the icebreaker of this mighty flood. Still, the general aim of Christianity is not so much to make this life pleasant as to make us worthy of a better. It looks beyond this span of time, this fleeting dream, in order to lead us to eternal salvation. Its tendency is ethical in the highest sense of the word, a tendency which had hitherto been unknown in Europe, as I have already pointed out to you by comparing the morality and religion of the ancients with those of Christianity. Philalithes. That is right so far as theory is concerned, but look at the practice. In comparison with the Christian centuries that followed, the ancient world was undoubtedly less cruel than the Middle Age, with its deaths by frightful torture, its countless burnings at the stake. Further, the ancients were very patient, thought very highly of justice, and frequently sacrificed themselves for their country, showed traits of magnanimity of every kind, and such genuine humanity that up to the present time an acquaintance with their doings and thoughts is called the study of humanity. Religious wars, massacres, crusades, inquisitions, as well as other persecutions, the extermination of the original inhabitants of America, and the introduction of African slaves in their place, were the fruits of Christianity, and among the ancients one cannot find anything analogous to these, anything to counterpoise it. For the slaves of the ancients, the familia, the verne, were a satisfied race and faithfully devoted to their masters, and as widely distinct from the miserable negroes of the sugar plantations, which are a disgrace to humanity, as they were in colour. The censurable toleration of pederasty, for which one chiefly reproaches the morality of the ancients, is a trifle compared with the Christian horrors I have cited, and is not so rare among people of today as it appears to be. Can you then, taking everything into consideration, maintain that humanity has really become morally better by Christianity? Demophiles. If the result has not everywhere corresponded with the purity and accuracy of the doctrine, it may be because this doctrine has been too noble, too sublime for humanity, and its aim set too high. To be sure, it was much easier to comply with heathen morality or with the Mohammedan. It is precisely what is most elevated that is the most open to abuse and deception. Abusus optimi pessimus. And therefore those lofty doctrines have sometimes served as a pretext for the most disgraceful transactions and veritable crimes. The downfall of the ancient institutions, as well as of the arts and sciences of the old world, is, as has been said, to be ascribed to the invasion of foreign barbarians. Accordingly, it was inevitable that ignorance and savagery got the upper hand, with the result that violence and fraud usurped their dominion, and knights and priests became a burden to mankind. This is partly to be explained by the fact that the new religion taught the lesson of eternal and not temporal welfare, that simplicity of heart was preferable to intellectual knowledge, and it was averse to all worldly pleasures which are served by the arts and sciences. However, in so far as they could be made serviceable to religion, they were promoted, and so flourished to a certain extent. End of section 15.